The Army is widening its pool of potential recruits. People with a history of some mental health issues can now seek waivers to join the military. The Pentagon made the decision because medical information about applicants is now easier to access. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is live at the Pentagon. Jen, why is the Army under pressure to figure out new standards for new recruits?
Well, Dana, the Army says that they're not changing their standards. But basically, to answer your question, the Army wants to grow to 540,000 troops and is facing a challenge recruiting 80,000 new recruits before September 2018 to meet that goal. Remember, it's always harder for the military to recruit when the economy is booming. Last year, the Army accepted more recruits that fared poorly on aptitude tests in order to meet their goal of 69,000 new soldiers, according to documents obtained by USA Today. They also increased the number of waivers for marijuana use. Fox News has confirmed the Army has shifted who can approve waivers for those recruits with a history of self-mutilation, bipolar disorder, depression, and drug and alcohol abuse. But they say they have not lowered the standards. They won't necessarily be granted a waiver by Army doctors, but now it will be up to a recruiting battalion commander, not the Department of the Army, to grant those waivers. There is now more leeway to take into account past mental health issues. The Army issued a ban on these waivers back in 2009 during the surge in Iraq, following a spike in suicide rates. Remember, during the surge in Iraq, the military also lowered standards in order to ramp up numbers quickly, Dana.
So is the Army frustrated with these reports that came out today?
The Army is frustrated. I've talked to officials there. They have not released a statement yet. We have confirmed, however, the new order to grant the waivers. Privately, what Army officials will tell you is that there is much more medical information available about a person's mental health, that just because someone was depressed as a teenager or was involved in cutting him or herself does not mean that person has not been treated by a mental health professional and should have that held against them. In terms of marijuana use, you also have a lot of states that have legalized marijuana since 2009, so that needs to be taken into account by recruiters. The flip side is that opening the Army up to those who have past mental health issues is a risk, but those who had trouble when they were 10 or 12 years old should not be stigmatized if they want to serve their country.
Especially really if they got help.
Yes, and it's a delicate balancing act that the Army is having to deal with this current situation.
All right, very interesting story. Jennifer Griffin, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, General, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. And I thank you for your appearing today. As I mentioned in my opening statement, 16 years ago, I think most of us would have been surprised to think that 16 years later, we would still be involved in a conflict in Afghanistan, arguably militarily the strongest nation on earth. And that, of course, as I mentioned earlier, is a tremendous price. 2,000 Americans given their lives. 20,000 more have been wounded. And our commander in Afghanistan testifies before this committee that we're in a, quote, stalemate. That's hard for most Americans to understand. And some of that, obviously, as I mentioned, is the failed strategy or lack of strategy by the previous administration. And I've said that fairly often. But I'd like to say again that you've been in office now since January, and so far we have not seen the details of a conditions-based strategy that will bring about an end to the conflict in Afghanistan. We've had as many as 100,000 troops in Afghanistan at one time or another, and it didn't end the conflict. I'd like for you to tell me how the inclusion of 2,500 is going to change the battlefield equation, including the fact that we have a classic West Point text of an enemy that is based in a sanctuary, that has a sanctuary in Pakistan. We know the street address of the Haqqani network in Quetta. We know where they are. We know what they're doing. We know what they're doing across the border, and yet we still have not, with any effectiveness in the last 16 years, restricted their activities and have had any particular progress in eliminating their sanctuary status. I'd just like to add one other point is, General Nicholson said that we are in a, quote, stalemate. After 16 years, should the taxpayers of America be satisfied that we are still in a, quote, stalemate? I don't think so. And then I'd like to finally repeat again, we have had a lack of communication and a lack of information to this committee that, to me, is very disturbing. There's not two individuals that I admire more than is sitting at the table facing this committee. But I want to tell you again, we will not accept a lack of information, a lack of strategy, a lack of coordination with this committee. And there are several methods, thanks to the Constitution, that we have to try to force a change in that relationship. I've been told by both of you that we have a new strategy, that we are now going to work closely together with the committee, that we are working with various allies. I'm glad to hear that. But if anyone on this committee feels that they have been fully briefed on what our strategy in Afghanistan and Iraq is, I would please raise your hand. So, the Constitution of the United States is something that every one of us raised our hands when we were sworn in as United States senators. One of the phrases, support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Not support and defend the President of the United States, but support and defend the Constitution of the United States. So all I can say is, with my deep admiration and respect for both of you, we're going to have to act to preserve and respect our constitutional responsibilities. The hearing that you gave a week or so ago, I thought it was nice to hear. I thought it was a lot of interesting information. But I certainly didn't think it was sufficient information for us to act on the Defense Authorization Bill, which provides for the training, equipping, protection, and capabilities of the men and women who are serving, that we represent, that are serving in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, etc. So all I can say to you, my friends, and you are my friends, there is a Constitution, we are a co-equal branch, and we will expect, and I know there's been turmoil within the White House, etc., and a number of other personnel issues, but that does not relieve you of the responsibility to keep us informed, to seek our advice and consent, and which is also in the Constitution. And if you don't, then we have no choice but to exercise our responsibilities under the Constitution, which we have. And I regret to say this to two of the people that I admire and respect as much as anyone I've ever known in the war, in my years of service.